Will Kayatin here with you live and in person with a very special guest presenter, Dr. Megan Best from the University of Kentucky. And so I am going to hush and step aside. Dr. Best, the stage is yours.
Great. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you virtually. I apologize that I can't be live, but I'm very honored and excited to be here in this space with you. As Dr. Kayatin shared, my name is Megan, and I am an assistant professor at the University of Kentucky. And so, again, I just first want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for your work and your commitment to students with the most extensive support needs and their families. I just can never give enough praise for the work that you do to advocate and support your students. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. I'll be sharing a bit about just writing different components of the IEP and talking about the conference summary. So Dr. Kayatin will be able to pause if you have any questions and answer those in real time or jot them down for them to be answered throughout. So I wanted to share a bit about me because I know I'm new to many of you and excited to partner down the line. But I worked for about 10 years as a high school special education teacher, as well as a special education administrator. So I originally received my undergraduate degree in K-12 special education and K-8 general education through Michigan State. And I did a full year of student teaching in Chicago Public Schools. But when I finished that program, I did not feel equipped or supported to sustain in the field to support students with the most extensive support needs. And the opportunity came to work as a high school special educator at a therapeutic or separate day program school. And I worked with high school students with the most extensive academic, functional, behavioral, social skill needs. And while I was there, I worked directly with all the different related service providers. That school actually served up to 94 different school districts that were just having a difficult time meeting the unique needs of their students. And so I worked there for 5 years and really just felt like I had the opportunity to learn so much from the experts and was so loving what I was doing. But my plan was always to shift back into Chicago. And I was living in Chicago at the time. And so I was able to work as again, a high school special ed teacher for students with the most extensive support needs and support students that lived in my same zip code. And so I really felt and continue to feel very fortunate that I was able to support students that were my neighbors and use my skill set in that way. But I quickly, found out that a lot of my colleagues were just felt similar to me, that they didn't have necessarily all the toolkits that they needed to feel confident and thrive in their practice. And so the opportunity came to become a special ed administrator. And so I supported over 34 schools in a network on the west side of Chicago, and then did a lot of citywide supports to support students and families and teachers for students from low incidence, backgrounds. And so I have a few pictures here of, working with different students. I also did homebound instruction, which was a really great opportunity for me. But as that time kind of wrapped, I just felt that there was still more work to be done, and I wanted to continue to support educators. And so I had the opportunity to pursue my PhD in special ed at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And I recently graduated there this past year. And so my work really focuses on that transition to adulthood for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'm really excited and jazzed about supporting teachers to develop plans that are really student and parent centered and thinking through student self-advocacy. And so again, I feel really grateful that Dr. Kayatin would invite me into this space to chat and hopefully learn alongside one another as we continue. And so I'm excited to be here in Kentucky and just kind of on a personal note, put down some roots. And so this picture is a little bit old, but I do have a daughter who just turned here over the weekend. So it's been a really big flurry of change. But again, just so excited to be here and to be able to chat about IEPs today, which is so important for students and families. So today we'll be talking about the different components of IEPs. We'll chat through some examples of goals and then just briefly highlight the conference summary and notes. Okay, so let's just dive right into it. We know that the IEP supports learning across many different areas for students, and it's really important because it's this document, this legal document that is really going to make sure that we're setting up our students to thrive and grow across the upcoming year. And so, IEP supports learning by making sure our students have access to the general education curriculum, and that includes access to those alternative state standards and early childhood standards. We want to be sure that our students are participating in developmentally appropriate activities. we need to make sure that our students are making progress in the general education curriculum. And so that's not only academically, but also behaviorally and functionally. We need to make sure that we're addressing the students' other unique educational needs, and especially as we think about, that transition to adulthood, which starts really active planning at age 14 here in Kentucky and 16 federally. Fun fact, in Illinois, it starts at 14 and a half. So I always was a little bit unsure about that. So I love that we were just starting here at 14. And so making sure that we're supporting students across all of these different domains. So when we think about this document, it's really capturing everything that we need to justify the work that we're going to do with our students. And so thinking about progress monitoring, making sure that's aligned to the student's IEP goals, and we have that really clear through line of what the student need is and what we're going to do to support that student need. And we also need, in those present levels, which we'll talk a little bit more about, just make sure that we're really capturing a full and robust picture of our students so that everyone's on the same page and we have the right steps and supports in place. And then again, when we think about transition, also making sure that at IEP meetings and throughout the year after students are 14, that we're having conversations with families around guardianship or maybe supported decision making for our students with those most extensive support needs or moderate and severe disabilities. So we also know that the ARC reviews the IEP and provides ongoing progress data. So it's the responsibility of the ARC team to review the IEP and make sure that ongoing progress monitoring to determine whether the measurable annual goals are being achieved. So an important point here is, as you're taking that data throughout the school year and you are analyzing that data on a consistent basis, if you recognize that a student is not making the expected progress that you anticipated when you as a team wrote that IEP, it is completely okay to reconvene the ARC team on that ARC meeting to talk about what the current data is and make adjustments to that goal. Because what we don't want to see is we recognize something isn't working or we might not meet that goal and kind of stay in that space until the next annual meeting. And ultimately, that's not going to be what's best for students. We want to be able to take the data, the active data, that progress monitoring data, and use that to make informed decisions throughout that whole year. And again, if we have to come back as a team, that's totally okay. I'm just wanting to make sure it's accurate and relevant to the students. Excuse me. The ARC revises the IEP as appropriate to address a lot of different components. So first is that progress towards measurable annual goals, progress in the general education curriculum, if appropriate, and even thinking about our students and their access to their general education peers, thinking about, what are those specials looking like? What are those opportunities that we can engage our students in? We need to make sure that the results of any reevaluation are included if it's a re-eval year. Information about the student is provided by or to the parents. I'm not sure what all of you have as your practice and rhythm, but something I did as an educator was, each student had a folder and I had printed out materials about how I was going to engage students and families and asking for their input. And I had a timeline or checklist of what I needed to do 8 weeks in advance, 6 weeks in advance, 4 weeks in advance. And that really helped me to make sure I was reaching out in advance to parents as well as talking with the student to make sure I was capturing their goals and desires for the year ahead. And when we think about information about the student being provided by the student, thinking about how are we providing our students access to meaningfully share what they're interested in, what their goals are, and even having opportunities to lead those conversations with their families and teams. We need to make sure that the student's strengths, interests, and anticipated needs are captured. And so we need to make sure that there are strengths woven throughout those present levels. And we're really first grounding our student in being a human. What are their strengths? What are their interests? Is it a student, as a teen? What are their strengths in the classroom or in the community setting? What are their strengths as a community member in their own classroom? And so I'm really always wanting to frame that. It just is so important and valuable. It's the first thing that families see. And so we just want to make sure we're providing and grounding this work in student strengths. And then other matters that might pop up as well. Oh, and I did want to note too, when you think about developing or writing student strengths and interests, I think talking with your paraprofessionals or other team members is always a really great way to gain insight. As educator, I often, there were classes my students would go to that I would only frequently visit, but often paraprofessionals were going with them. So that are always a great resource to be able to learn more information to make sure I was capturing that snapshot of the student across all different settings in their day. Okay, so there are also additional considerations. So we have strengths and concerns of the student as well as those of the parents and guardians. We'll chat about it a little bit later, but we want to make sure in that conference summary that any concerns or desires or even highlights, are going to be captured in that conference summary. Again, the results of the initial or most recent evaluation, as appropriate, the results of the student's performance on any general, state, or district-wide assessment programs, and that can also include those alternative state targets too. And then reporting out on the academic, developmental, and functional needs of the student. Next, we'll talk a bit about present levels of academic achievement. And so present levels provide the ARC with a baseline of the student's strengths and needs, along with progress monitoring and evaluation data. The present level is really the foundation of this document. If we hop over into the goals or we look at the specially designed instruction and related services and supplementary aids and services, if we have things in those sections that aren't initially captured in the present levels, then we have a bit of a problem, right? So when we think about these present levels, it's really the foundation. We're laying the foundation for everything we're going to reference moving forward to justify why that student needs a certain goal, needs a service, whatever it might be. We should have that through line from the present level to different sections of the IEP. And again, just highlighting that, that really justifies, the instruction that we provide as well. So kind of my rule of thumb when I've supported other teachers or my own practice is really thinking about how can you triangulate or have multiple data sources in each present level to capture the best picture of the student. We know that many times there are many assessments, right, that are not going to be the best tool to measure the success, the needs of our students, with low incidence disabilities. And so it's really important to capture or pull from other data sources. Thinking about observational data, thinking about formative assessments you're using in your classrooms, thinking about those alternative state standards. We really need to make sure that we have the goal of at least 3 data sources, and Dr. Kayatin can provide, further guidance on that, but at least 3 data sources to be able to justify and paint the picture of why a goal is needed. And that information also helps to drive why we as educators are providing the specially designed instruction that we are, and how and why we're providing access to those aids and services. As we think about specially designed instruction and the supports and services, SDI, or specially designed instruction, is really what the teacher is doing. It's all those excellent and amazing teacher moves and instructional practices that you are putting into place to help your students find success and grow in their respective goal and domain areas. Whereas the supports and services is the service support to help an individual student need. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. We also know that there should be a direct relationship in this section and the measurable annual goals and any short-term objectives or benchmarks, as well as the accommodations developed and recorded in the rest of the IEP document. So again, we're building a strong foundation. We're rooting this in data from multiple data sources to really guide why it is we're selecting and writing the goals in which they are and the criteria. This is also where we're going to want to capture any baseline data that we have for our students and the goals that we're writing. So there are all these different areas for, as you well know, for the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. And so we have all of these areas, which include communication, academic performance, health, vision, hearing, and motor abilities, social and emotional status, general intelligence, transition needs, functional vision and learning media assessment, and then functional hearing, listening, and communication assessment. So I'd like to kind of zoom in and highlight on this area of communication, especially thinking about our students with moderate and severe disabilities. We know that both receptive and expressive communication may be an area of need for those students. We also know that many of our students utilize a variety of augmentative and alternative communication devices. And so this is where we're really going to put that key information to make sure that we have a sense and understanding of what the student needs, what's working for them for their communication, and what we need support in, what needs to be worked on. So we really want to make sure we're capturing that information there. And as kind of a rule of thumb, if you're not going to write a goal for an area, then you can check the box that this would not be an area of need. There still might be important information, but we can kind of move that into the other section. So kind of a rule of thumb, in talking with Brenda and Dr. Kayatin really is that we should have a goal kind of linked to each of these domains or areas. So let's give an example. We'll read through one together of a present level. So I'll read this aloud for us. It says, Jason's strength is in phonics. He knows all 26 letters and their sounds at 92.3% accuracy. He can blend letter combinations to spell words on a second grade level at 65% accuracy. He does require a reader on timed tests and extended time due to his working memory and processing speed being in the very low range and reading comprehension at the 1.8 grade level. He does get anxious when he hears the word timed and often will rush through passages. Jason's concern is vocabulary and fluency. Jason is at a 2.1 grade level in vocabulary and is reading 32 correct words per minute. Since Jason is in the 4th grade, he should be reading around 120 words per minute. Jason's educational performance will be adversely affected when reading material above his independent reading level for all classes. Ooh, that's a lot of good details in there. I'm going to ask you to just pause here and take a moment to think through what do you observe about this present level, specifically thinking about the data sources. Okay, bringing it back. Yeah, there's at least 5 different data sources in here, right? We're getting a really clear picture of where Jason is at. That's really going to help drive the goals that we're going to write. When I'm reading through this example, I'm not seeing, subjective opinions from, the professional writing it. Not vague terms. We're really seeing very explicit and clear information about the student. There's enough here that it really shows, where the student is at. We start the section with a strength of the student, and then ending the section with thinking about that adverse effect or impact on accessing the grade level content. So, again, starting with those strengths, really building this out with data to justify the goals and the need and everything else that's going to come from it, and then making the statement again about why we need to work on this area and how this impacts Jason to access his gen ed curriculum or his peers without disabilities. Next, we'll touch on the consideration of special factors. So there are multiple sections here. They include behavior, the students being an English learner, a student that is blind or visually impaired, communication, a student that is deaf or hard of hearing, or a student that utilizes assistive technology. So we're going to take a shift and talk about 2 of these. So first, we're going to talk about behavior. So for our students with intellectual disabilities, we must always check yes or mark this box. If there is maladaptive behavior, we must address that the student is engaged in PBIS and or other supports. If there's not maladaptive behavior, we can discuss adaptive behavior. So thinking about academic skills, social skills, thinking about the expressive and receptive communication, daily living, all the different aspects of daily living from personal grooming to self-management, all those different aspects. So again, if we have a student that has an intellectual disability, we'll mark that box yes, and then follow the next steps. Next, I want to highlight assistive technology. So if a student is using a device that the general ed students are not using to access a task or skill, it's going to be assistive technology. So here's an example. We know that many students access a Chromebook. All students, whether they have a disability or they do not, they're engaging in that instruction with the Chromebook. Where we see the assistive technology would be if the student is using the Chromebook and then using that text-to-speech feature to help have that text read aloud. So we're not changing the learning expectation, depending on the skill or task we're looking at here. But what we can see is that we've taken this technology tool and the original intent of which it's designed, and we've made an adaptation, or we're using a feature of it in a different way to support students with disabilities. Another example would be the use of a calculator, thinking about when students without disabilities have access to a calculator, and thinking about, the need or purpose of a student with a disability having access to a calculator. And also even thinking through like a different calculator than a standard calculator. Maybe it's larger for a student that needs, maybe has some tactile or fine motor issues. Perhaps it is speak aloud or read aloud, calculator. So really thinking about the purpose and intent of the technology. We'll keep talking about assistive technology a little bit. So here's an example for literacy. I'm not sure if it looks a little blurry here, but we know that assistive technology is on a continuum. And so there's low tech, assistive tech, mid tech, and high tech. And so I think oftentimes when we think about assistive technology, we kind of land in this high tech range, but there's actually a wide variety and continuum of assistive technology. So let's take this literacy example here. So low tech or no tech would be if a student needs some form of assistive technology to engage in the material. So maybe utilizing highlighters helps the student to focus or attend to key vocabulary or certain paragraphs. A student might benefit from a pencil grip to support their writing. It may be that a student has a slant board that maybe has a clipboard top on it. These are all no-tech options that allow the student entry and access to the same instruction as their peers without disabilities. When we look at mid-tech, we're adding a little electronics here. So that might include a reading pen, audiobooks, voice magnification, and then moving into high tech, again, those text-to-speech apps, voice recognition, all the different accessibility features in Google Chrome. And so I'm sure that your students are accessing a lot of these different things across different areas. And so we just want to make sure we're capturing that within the IEP document and justifying, and with evidence about when these tools have been successful, if you've evaluated for them, and again, justifying why we have them. So those are key areas we wanted to touch on. This is a great resource that I love and recommend. I'm probably going to ask Dr. Kayatin if you can take this link from the PowerPoint and put it into the chat for a brief activity. So I really like this resource for assistive technology. It's available for free online. And what happens is when you visit this site, it pops up like a word, almost like a word web, if you will, but a web of different choices. And you can select the category of need based on your students or classroom needs. And then once you open that domain, you get prompted with more options to go ahead and look through the specific skill set that your student might need assistive technology for. So at this time, I'll pause and ask Dr. Kayatin if you could share this link in the chat and then take a few minutes to explore this resource. And then once you're finished in the chat, if you could write 2 to 3 different assistive technologies you could implement with your students based on what you saw. So again, we'll give you a few minutes to do that. Okay, shifting gears again, we're going to talk about annual measurable goals. So the measurable annual goals are statements of anticipated results to be achieved in a calendar year or sooner as determined by the ARC. So they need to be those SMART goals, they need to be measurable and thinking about the year to come. And it's more than just the standards. It's really about, the targets and goals of what we're trying to support the student to help make meaningful progress in the ways that's relevant to them. Measurable annual goals are not written to restate the content standards, but rather to specify the skills or strategies that will promote accessing to the general curriculum and aid the student in meeting achievement standards during those next 12 months. These goals need to be designed to meet the needs resulting from the student's disability to make progress in the general curriculum, and the goals must be appropriately ambitious in light of the student's circumstance and consider the student's potential for growth. So we want these to be meaningful and rigorous for each student, and we know that supporting our students, that's going to look different for each student, right? So again, going back to those present levels, again, really painting the clear picture of what the student's strengths are, what they need, and how is this going to help guide us in writing these goals for the year ahead. And we want to make sure that parents understand the purpose of these goals, and working with many families across the years, all families come to the table at the ARC with different amounts of knowledge or background, but they are all experts on their child. And so it's really important to make sure we're gathering their information, we're understanding their goals, and we're also making sure all of this is accessible and user-friendly language, right? It's a ton of acronyms, it's a ton of dense content. So we want to make sure that parents understand this and understand that we're taking data on these throughout the year. I always say, as a side note, I always told my students and parents, like, I want to empower you to have the knowledge that you need to advocate for your student, your child, because at the end of the day, they're the longest standing members of that team, right, across all these years. And so we want to make sure that when they transition, their child transitions out of K-12 educational services, that they are ready and empowered to advocate for adult services and other opportunities as needed. So as we continue to think about these goals, the IEP is not intended, and these goals are not intended to reflect the student's entire curriculum. It should promote the learning skills the student needs to develop and achieve greater mastery and understanding of the general ed curriculum and content and build independence. These goals are not directly related to the student's needs. Measurable annual goals are not directly related to the student's needs based on the disability as described in the present levels. So we need to make sure that it's not only related to a student's disability, but it's really it's capturing the full scope of who that student is, right? Like they have their disability and we are supporting them in that. And we're also gathering additional information about their learning needs. And so we're really, again, painting this big picture about who the student is. And the measurable annual goals are focused on bridging the gap from where the student is at baseline to where the student needs to be for the goal across both academic and functional skills. So we can't write, 20 goals, but also when thinking about our students with low incidence disabilities, we want to have a good amount of goals. It's going to be different for each student, but that we're helping them to achieve the skills and learning and growth that they need. And so when we think about how the goal is written, we want to make sure that our baseline data matches that we've actually taken some baseline data at the criterion level that we're going to be writing a goal to evaluate the student on. So again, that through line to make sure we have justified our need for supporting the student in that area. So let's do some examples of measurable goals. So this first one is for Sally. It says, given 5 addition or subtraction problems within 10, so the number 10, and access to manipulatives, Sally will accurately solve the problems with 80% accuracy across 3 consecutive weekly probes as measured by math probe data. So it's very clear in this goal what we're working on. We have our criterion. We know that Sally is going to be given access to 5 addition or subtraction problems. We know that it's not going all the way up to 20 or 50, that we're going to cap it at 10. We know that she's going to be provided access to manipulatives. And then we have this criterion that she's going to be able to solve the problems with 80% accuracy across 3 consecutive data sessions. And then we have the way in which we're going to measure that. So what I would expect to see, when looking at a present level, is that there is data in that present level related to these skills that really justifies the need for the goal. Let's try our second one here. Given 5 kindergarten level Dulce sight word flashcards, Jessie will verbally identify each word within 5 seconds of presentation with 90% accuracy across 3 consecutive trials as measured by weekly checklists. So things that stand out to me about this goal are that we've really specified the number of sight words we're working on. We know that they're at the kindergarten level. We've given examples of what those words will be. We've set the criteria that Jessie is going to verbally identify each of these and do so within 5 seconds. And so we really can see just very clearly what this goal is going to look like in implementation. And the more clear the goals are, the easier they are going to be to take data on. And I'll never forget just sharing personally, in my first 2 years, I think, of working as a special ed teacher, and I had a lot of paraprofessionals in my classroom because my students had really high support needs. And the mid-quarter came and I had students' IEP binders out and I was analyzing the data, to make sure I had everything in place. And I realized that how I took data versus how Ms. Kathy took data versus, how Ms. Hannah took data was very differently. And I quickly found out that I was writing goals in my own practice. I was writing goals that were not clear and objective, and it was not obvious about what the conditions of the goals were to indicate if the student had met that criteria or not. And I'll just never forget that small group conversation talking about, well, how are you taking the data and how are you taking the data? And, in my experience, if the student needed more than 4 verbal and visual prompts and to get the sight word, then the sight word's not a good example, I apologize. To do the math problem, it was going to be a minus on my data sheet. Whereas for Miss Kathy, if she gave a lot of prompting and then would give the student a plus when they met it. And so that we quickly noticed those discrepancies. And so I think having really clearly written goals led to really important conversations with my staff and I that led to better data collection as a whole. And so I'll just never forget that. We've got 2 more examples here. Given lined writing paper and a visual model, Mary will trace her first name 5 times with correct letter formation and alignment with 90% accuracy across 3 consecutive trials as measured by weekly writing checklists. So again, it's very clear about what Mary's going to be provided, what she's expected to do, what the criteria is to achieve this, and how in which we're going to take that data. I'll give you a moment to read through this last goal. And then if you could just provide a quick chat, or even you can unmute too, to comment on what you see about this goal that either makes it a strong goal or anything you notice that might be missing. Okay, now we're going to move forward and talk about when given a goal and then thinking through the objectives that go with this goal. So we're going to revisit back with Sally, but we're going up to 20. So given 5 addition or subtraction problems within 20 and access to manipulatives, Sally will accurately solve the problems with 80% accuracy across 3 consecutive weekly probes as measured by math probe data. We'll give you a moment to look through each of the objectives. So we have objective 1, 2, and 3. You can feel free to add in the chat if anything is standing out to you, what you're noticing about these objectives. All right, so as I look through these objectives, I'm noticing that we are seeing how Sally is working on this skill. So we know her final goal, her annual goal, is that she's going to be able to do 5 addition or subtraction problems with 20 and accessing manipulatives. So in this first objective, she's solving the problems using a bead string. In the second objective, we can see that Sally is using counters to help with this skill. And then in the third example, we can see that she's using a number line. So I really love this example within the objectives because we can see different strategies that Sally is learning that will help her to achieve her annual goal, that she could draw upon many different strategies or methods using different types of manipulatives to be able to solve those math problems. And this is really great, another really great example because it really shows about how that IEP, this goal specifically and objectives are giving the strategy Sally needs. And then, hopefully she's able to, will work on generalizing using those different skills across settings. Okay, so now you'll have an opportunity to practice. So using the goal below, we'd love to ask you to create 2 objectives. I'll read this aloud. Given a 3rd grade level text, Ruby will accurately summarize the main idea using supporting details with 80% accuracy for 3 consecutive trials as measured by weekly reading probes. Go ahead and take some time now to write 2 objectives that align with this goal. Sure, those were excellent objectives. Maybe I'll be able to hear or read about them sometime. But I want to kind of, as we near the end of our time together, talk about the conference summary and notes. So, being the special education teacher and case manager for the student, it is our responsibility that we are not only filling out all components of the IEP, but we need to be documenting this and addressing it in the conference summary. So the more detail we can add, the better, because if it is not written, it will not happen. And so I always made sure to, at times it was difficult for me to kind of keep track of everything at once. And so utilizing a Post-it note, having a team member also be kind of attuned to that and keep in mind so we could kind of make sure that everything was adequately captured at the end of the meeting was always a helpful strategy for me. So again, wanting to make sure that the more detail we provide, the better. It's going to be better, not only for us as educators as we're writing these, but also for students and families and that continuity of support and care and instruction that we're providing our students. Thank you all so much for sticking with me here virtually. I have my email here if you have any questions. Thank you again for all that you do to support our students. Our students have such great skills and strengths and interests and are part of our classroom culture and our communities. And so I just thank you all for what you do to really ensure students have access to everything that they need to find success, not only now, but in their transition to adulthood. And so I'm excited to meet you all down the road. And I thank you again for all you do. And with that, I'll thank Brenda and Dr. Kayatin as well for having me. And again, if you need anything, feel free to reach out.